Story 1. The Sediment of Volition. The heat of the mid-afternoon sun pressed against the dry earth of the kingdom of Kosala, where a lone traveler paused beside a slow-moving tributary of the Ganges. He was not seeking a destination in the physical sense, but rather a reprieve from the internal noise that had pursued him across 40 years of unexamined living. As he looked into the murky depths, he noticed how the fine silt did not merely exist as an external entity, but as a direct reflection of the persistent weight within his own consciousness. Every ripple on the surface seemed to be born from a stir deep within the mud, just as every action he had ever taken emerged from the subtle and often invisible movements of his own spirit. He realized that the law of cause and effect was not a distant celestial ledger managed by an angry deity, but a mechanical inevitability woven into the very fabric of his breathing. The traveler understood that the future was being sculpted in this very moment, not through grand gestures or public declarations, but through the quiet, microscopic pivot of his own intention. It was the quality of the underlying desire that colored the result, long before the result ever manifested in the world of form. He watched a single leaf fall from a banyan tree and drift upon the water, noting how its path was determined by currents that had begun miles upstream. His mind began to trace the lineage of his own current sorrows, finding their roots in small, forgotten choices made in the shadow of greed or the fog of confusion. The weight of his past felt like the thickness of the water, slow and resistant to change. Yet he saw that the water itself remained fundamentally clear if the silt were allowed to settle. This settling was not an act of will, but a surrender to the natural law that dictates that like follows like. He contemplated the vastness of the cycles of birth and death, seeing them not as a linear progression, but as a complex web of intersecting echoes. Every thought was a stone thrown into a pond, and the waves were bound to return to the center eventually. He saw that building a solid future required no architectural plans or stone monuments, but a radical honesty regarding the secret seeds he planted in the privacy of his own heart. The realization was heavy yet liberating, for it meant that he was the sole master of the terrain to come. There was no luck, only the harvest of what had been sown with careful or careless hands. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, violet shadows over the dusty road, the traveler felt the first cooling of the internal fire. He understood that by simply changing the tilt of his soul toward the light of awareness, he was already rerouting the rivers of his destiny. The silence of the forest seemed to affirm this truth, as if the trees themselves were monuments to the slow, patient growth of cause into effect. He took a step forward, not with the haste of a man trying to escape his past, but with the deliberate grace of one who knows that the ground beneath his feet is made of his own making. The path stretched out toward the distant lights of a village, yet he was no longer concerned with reaching the end. Each footfall was a declaration of a new beginning, a refined thread being added to a tapestry that spanned across 1,000 lifetimes. He felt the immense responsibility of his own existence, a burden that was also the highest form of freedom. The water continued to flow, carrying away the old silt while the traveler remained, watching the clarity emerge from the stillness of his own redirected will. It was a profound and solitary awakening to the gravity of his own mind, an understanding that would serve as the only true foundation for whatever winters or summers might follow. The journey was no longer about the road, but about the traveler who walked it. Story 2. The Echo of the Unseen Loom. Deep within the dense bamboo forests bordering the Magadha kingdom, an elderly man spent his days tending to a garden that held no edible fruit. He cultivated only the spaces between the trees, observing how the shadows shifted with the slow arc of the sun. To the passing merchants, he appeared idle, yet his mind was engaged in the most strenuous labor of mapping the architecture of his own habits. He saw that his life was not a series of disconnected events, but a single, continuous thread of energy that had been twisted and dyed by every thought he had ever harbored in the secret chambers of his heart. Every minor irritation at a broken branch or every fleeting surge of pride at a well-cleared path was a seed being cast into the fertile soil of his future experience. The garden was merely the canvas upon which the inevitable consequence of his internal state was being painted. He noticed that even when he remained perfectly still, the momentum of his previous years of anger and striving continued to vibrate through his limbs like the after-hum of a struck bell. This was the true nature of the law he sought to understand, the way an original impulse carries itself forward long after the hand has let go. He began to perceive the air around him as thick with the ghosts of his own former selves, each one whispering the suggestions that led to his current state of being. The future was not a mystery to be solved, but a mathematical certainty being calculated by the arithmetic of his own reactions. If he reacted with resentment to the stinging of a wasp, he was strengthening the neural pathways of bitterness that would surely define his next year of life. Conversely, if he observed the pain with a detached and curious compassion, he was dissolving the very structure of his future suffering. The old man realized that the most solid future was built on the ruins of the ego, where the need for a specific outcome was replaced by a profound trust in the equilibrium of the universe. He watched as a spider wove its web between two bamboo stalks, admiring how the creature did not struggle against the wind, but integrated the vibration of the air into its own structural design. His internal landscape began to mirror this flexibility, as he stopped trying to force his destiny into a shape that pleased his vanity. He saw that his identity was nothing more than a collection of karmic patterns, a temporary constellation of old desires and fears that had found a home in his physical form. To build for the future was to refine the quality of the present observer. He reflected on the kings he had once served, men who built empires of stone only to have them swallowed by the jungle, never realizing that the only enduring kingdom was the one created by a disciplined and peaceful mind. The karmic law was a mirror that never lied and never forgot, reflecting back the exact vibration of the heart with terrifying precision. As the twilight deepened into a rich indigo, the old man felt a sense of vastness opening within his chest. He was no longer a victim of his past or a fearful waiter for his future. He was the weaver at the loom, and though the threads of his previous choices were already set in the warp, the color of the weft was entirely up to him in this very moment. The stillness of the forest became a teacher, showing him that true power lay in the ability to hold all things without grasping. He recognized that the future was not a destination he would eventually reach, but a resonance he was broadcasting right now. The air felt cooler, and the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves rose to meet him, reminding him of the cyclical nature of all things. He closed his eyes and listened to the silence, finding that the silence itself was full of the potential for a peace that no external circumstance could ever disturb. This was the foundation he had sought, a fortress made of pure awareness that stood outside the reach of decay and change. He was finally at home in the mechanism of his own soul. Story 3. The Sculptor of Intangible Clay. Outside the bustling gates of Rajgir, where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the dust of merchant caravans, a master potter named Harita sat before a spinning wooden wheel that seemed to govern the rhythm of the entire universe. He did not look at the clay with the eyes of a craftsman seeking profit, but with the gaze of a philosopher observing the birth of a soul. his hands, calloused and stained by the gray earth of the Ganges, moved with a precision that was less about physical strength and more about the alignment of his internal state. He understood that the jar he was shaping was merely a physical echo of a shape already formed within his own consciousness. Every wobble in the wet mud was a direct manifestation of a flicker of doubt, and every elegant curve was the result of a mind that had found its center in the teachings of the Enlightened One. He watched as the wheel spun, reflecting on how the law of karma operated like the centrifugal force that kept the clay from collapsing into a formless heap. The past was the quality of the clay itself, its grit and its moisture content determined by where it had been gathered and how it had been cured over many months. The present was the pressure of his thumbs, the subtle, almost invisible adjustments that dictated whether the vessel would hold water or crack under the heat of the kiln. He saw that many people lived their lives as if they were merely the clay, being battered by the external world, unaware that they were also the potter and the wheel itself. The future was not a destination one arrived at, but a pattern that was being pressed into the soft substance of the spirit with every passing second. As he worked, a young monk walked by in silence, his saffron robe a vibrant contrast to the dull earth, and Harita felt the resonance of that silence enter his own heart. He realized that the most beautiful jars were those that were formed in a state of total presence, where the boundary between the creator and the creation dissolved into a single movement of law. The karma of the jar was its durability and its grace, and its future was already written in the stillness of the potter's hands before the fire ever touched it. He contemplated the 750 years of ancestors who had worked this same ground, their joys and sorrows now nothing more than the minerals that gave the clay its color. He felt the weight of that history, yet he knew that he was not bound by it unless he chose to repeat the same unconscious motions. To build a solid future was to master the pressure of the thumb in the here and now, ensuring that the intent was pure and the focus was unwavering. He closed his eyes and felt the vibration of the spinning wood through his seat, realizing that the entire world was a massive kiln and every action was a piece of wood added to the flames. The quality of the heat determined the strength of the result, and the quality of the mind determined the nature of the heat. By the time the sun had reached its zenith, the potter had produced but a single jar, yet it stood as a monument to a mind that had reconciled itself with the absolute precision of cause and effect. He knew that even if the jar were to break tomorrow, the transformation that had occurred within him during its creation was an indestructible seed planted in the garden of his destiny. The world around him continued its frantic pace, but the potter remained in the cool shade of his hut, content in the knowledge that he was no longer drifting, but consciously weaving the fabric of his own becoming. Story 4. The Ripples of the Silent Bell. In the profound stillness of the Jetavana Grove, where the ancient trees stood like silent sentinels guarding the wisdom of the ages, a monk named Ananda sat by a stone well at the hour before dawn. The morning mist clung to the ground like a shroud, blurring the lines between the earth and the sky, and the only sound was the rhythmic dripping of dew from the broad leaves of a Bodhi tree. He was observing the surface of the water in the well, which was as smooth as a polished mirror until a single drop of condensation fell from the overhanging moss. He watched as the tiny impact created a series of concentric circles that expanded outward, striking the stone walls and then returning to the center in a complex interference of waves. To Ananda, this was the perfect metaphor for the human mind and its relationship to the law of karma. Every thought, even the most subtle and fleeting, was a drop of water hitting the reservoir of the subconscious, creating movements that would eventually ripple back to the source. He understood that the confusion of the world was merely the result of billions of such drops being thrown into the water at once, creating a chaotic surface where the true depth could no longer be seen. To build a solid future was to first master the art of non-disturbance, ensuring that when a drop did fall, it was intentional and clear. He thought of the many travelers who came to the Buddha seeking luck or divine intervention, never realizing that they were carrying the source of their own misfortune in the pockets of their own habits. They were like men throwing jagged rocks into their own wells and then complaining that the water was too muddy to drink. Ananda felt the cooling air on his skin and realized that his own peace was not a gift from the heavens, but the inevitable fruit of 800 nights of disciplined meditation and the conscious pruning of his own desires. The law of karma was the ultimate equilibrium, a cosmic balance sheet that required no external auditor because the debt and the payment were one and the same. He saw that the future was not something that happened to a person, but something that grew out of them like a vine from a seed. If the seed was bitterness, the vine would surely produce thorns, no matter how much one prayed for roses. He watched as a small bird landed on the edge of the well and drank, its tiny movements sending new ripples across the cooling surface. Even this small interaction was a part of the vast web of causality, a reminder that no creature existed in isolation from the consequences of its own nature. Ananda reflected on the structure of his own mind, noticing how the echoes of his childhood fears still occasionally vibrated in the depths of his awareness, like the faint memory of a storm long after the clouds had cleared. He knew that the only way to transform the future was to remain as the silent observer of these ripples, neither grasping at the pleasant ones nor recoiling from the painful ones. By remaining still, he allowed the energy of the past to exhaust itself against the stone walls of his equanimity. As the first light of the sun began to pierce through the canopy, turning the mist into a golden haze, he felt a profound sense of empowerment. He was not a leaf being blown by the wind of fate, but the atmosphere through which the wind moved. The solidity of his future was found in the transparency of his present, in the realization that there was no him separate from the actions he performed. The monk rose from his seat, his movements fluid and conscious, and as he walked toward the monastery for the morning prayers, he left no trace of his passing in the dust. He was a man who had learned to walk through the world without disturbing the water, and in that stillness, he had found the only future worth building. The birds began their morning chorus, and the forest came alive with the sound of thousands of tiny causes leading to thousands of tiny effects. A symphony of law that Ananda now heard with perfect clarity. Story 5. The Architecture of the Internal Vault. In the high, wind-swept plateaus beyond the kingdom of Magadha, a man who had once been a collector of royal taxes lived in a cave carved from the red sandstone. He had spent 30 years meticulously recording the debts of others, but now he sat in the absolute silence of the mountain to audit the ledger of his own spirit. He observed how every memory was not merely a record of the past, but a heavy stone placed in the foundation of his current mental state. He realized that his mind was a vast and complex architecture, built brick by brick through every small decision to prioritize his own comfort over the needs of the struggling farmers he had once exploited. The law of karma did not appear to him as a judge with a gavel, but as the sheer weight of these accumulated stones pressing down upon the floor of his consciousness. He understood that to build a solid future, he could not simply walk away from this building, for he was the building itself. Every flicker of remorse was a crack in the old masonry, and every moment of honest reflection was a bracing beam added to a crumbling wall. He watched the way the dust settled on the stone floor, seeing in its slow accumulation the way his own habits of thought gathered and solidified over time. If he allowed the dust of greed to settle day after day, the future would inevitably be a suffocating chamber of his own making. However, if he used the breath of his awareness to sweep the floor clean every hour, the future would remain an open and airy temple. The man saw that most people were busy trying to decorate the exterior of their lives, while the interior structure was rotting from the dampness of unexamined fear. He spent his days sitting perfectly still, feeling the subtle shifts in the pressure of his own ego, which was like the shifting of the earth beneath the cave. He realized that the only way to ensure a stable future was to build on the bedrock of the present moment, refusing to add any more stones of deception or malice to the pile. This required a terrifyingly precise attention to the microscopic movements of his own volition. He had to catch the impulse to be annoyed by the cold wind before it turned into a grievance, and he had to recognize the desire for a better cave before it became a source of suffering. In this radical honesty, he found a type of strength that the kings he once served could never comprehend. It was the power of the architect who has finally mastered the materials of his own mind. He looked out at the distant horizon, where the peaks of the Himalayas were catching the final rays of the sun, and he saw them not as barriers, but as symbols of the height he could reach if his foundation remained pure. The future was no longer a looming shadow, but a blueprint he was refining with every heartbeat. He understood that the law of cause and effect was the only true security in an unstable world, because it ensured that no sincere effort toward clarity would ever be lost. Every second of silence was a new, clean stone being laid in a path that stretched across the mountain of time. He was no longer the collector of debts, but the payer of his own ransom, freeing himself from the prison of his past through the relentless discipline of his current awareness. The mountain remained silent. Yet in that silence, the man heard the sound of 1,000 walls falling and the birth of a space that was finally, truly solid. Story 6. The Resonance of the Unstruck String. By the banks of the river Achiravati, where the water whispered secrets to the swaying reeds during the peak of the monsoon, a woman named Sumana spent her evenings watching the flow of the current. She was a weaver of fine silk, but her true fascination lay in the way the water moved around the obstacles in its path, never losing its essence despite the constant change in its form. She had come to realize that her own consciousness was like the river, and her past actions were the rocks and fallen trees that dictated the speed and direction of the flow. Every harsh word she had ever spoken was a jagged stone that created a permanent eddy of turbulence in her spirit, while every act of kindness was a smoothing of the riverbed that allowed for a more graceful passage. She understood that the future was not a distant land she would eventually reach, but the specific resonance that her life produced as it moved through the world. Just as a lute string continues to vibrate after it has been plucked, her mind was filled with the vibrations of her previous choices, coloring the way she perceived the scent of the rain and the sound of the evening birds. She saw that the most solid future was built by learning to tune the mind to the frequency of the unconditioned, a state that existed before the first string of desire was ever pulled. She watched a fishing boat struggle against the current, noting how the fisherman's struggle only created more resistance and more exhaustion. Her own life had been a series of such struggles, until she began to listen to the silent teachings of the Tathagata. She realized that the law of karma was not a cycle of punishment, but a natural adjustment toward harmony, a way for the universe to teach the soul the cost of its own discord. To build a future of peace, she had to stop fighting the river and instead become the water itself, accepting the presence of the rocks without being defined by them. She began to spend her hours in a state of soft, expansive awareness, allowing the echoes of her past to arise and dissolve without adding any new energy to their movement. She saw that every thought was a potential seed for a future lifetime, and by choosing to remain in the clarity of the present, she was starving those seeds of the water they needed to grow. This was the true meaning of meditation, a deep and quiet pruning of the possibilities until only the most luminous path remained. She felt the cool mud beneath her feet and the damp air on her face, and she knew that these sensations were the only truth she could ever rely on. The past was a dream that had left its residue in her muscles, and the future was a dream that had not yet been dreamed. But the law that connected them was as real as the gravity that held the river to the earth. She smiled at the realization that she was no longer afraid of the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, for she had found the center of the storm within her own chest. The solidity of her future was found in her willingness to be empty, to let the world pass through her like light through a window. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, reflecting in the still pools along the riverbank, Sumana felt herself expanding until she was the river, the stars, and the silence between them. The journey was over because the traveler had recognized that the road was her own shadow. She rose and walked back toward the village, her heart beating with the slow and steady rhythm of a universe that had finally found its balance. There was nothing left to build, for the foundation was now the entire cosmos, and the future was simply the endless blossoming of that perfect, unshakable peace.